Welcome to the Michelle Rempel Garner podcast.
Coming to you live during the Canadian federal general election campaign. And actually, this series of episodes are going to be brought to you from two people in the middle of a campaign. So you're going to get to hear a little bit of a behind the scenes take and what it's like to be in a campaign. But also, we're going to go through today some of the big announcements that have been made on the campaign trail in the first week of the general election, as well as some of the scandals and questions that are remaining, particularly from Liberal leader Mark Carney. I'm joined today by veteran campaign strategist and my campaign manager, Sean Schnell. Sean, it's been a busy couple of days.
Yeah, there's been a little bit going on in politics, a little bit more than usual, but we are in the midst of a pretty exciting election campaign.
We are, and Sean, you're sitting in our campaign office right now. It's been busy. Thanks to all the volunteers who got, what was it? I think it was 75 signs out on day one, and they're working hard. All of our door knockers and lit droppers and canvassers. Yeah, it's quite the operation that you're overseeing right now.
It is, and yeah, for those that have never been on a Conservative campaign, it is a flurry of activity and something that every Conservative should check out at some point in time, that they should be getting out and helping their local Conservative candidate. There is a lot of work to do and not much time to do it.
So let's get right into some of the announcements that have been made this week. So, we've been out on the doors for the last few days, and some of the questions that we've been getting are directly related to platform. What is the Conservative Party plan? And Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, he took this tactical approach to put out some fairly big media announcements on the first week of the campaign. So the big one on day one was the announcement of a very sizable income tax cut. So on day one, he announced he would cut income tax by 15%. So that means that Conservatives will reduce the lowest income tax bracket from 15% to 12.75%. That works out to a savings of the average family of $1,800 a year, and the average worker up to $900 annually. Now, when we've been on the doors for months now, and also just hearing communications in the constituency office, affordability still remains the number one issue that people are worried about in our community. That's what I hear. I thought this was a great announcement to get out on the doors like day one, because it affects everybody and it affects that core issue.
Yeah, I think it's really smart, and it speaks to how in tune the Conservative Party and Pierre is with the realities that a lot of Canadian families are facing. This is going to help a lot of families that have, quite frankly, been struggling to get by over the last 10 years under the Liberals, where you've got families that are working 1, 2, 3 jobs, lots of side gigs and hustling on the side, and they need a break. And so this type of an announcement of a 15% income tax break that is going to see the average Canadian family save almost $2,000 a year, $1,800 for an average Canadian family, that is significant. That is the difference maker for a lot of families that are looking at bills and expensive grocery bills and mortgages and heating and all of this. And that is the type of announcement that makes a difference for real people.
And I think it also shows that the Conservatives are in tune with what are still very major ballot questions. So the Liberals have been trying to frame out the ballot question as a deflection from their 10 years of failure to making it someone else's fault. Now, I'll preface this comment by saying the threat of American tariffs rightly has a lot of people very concerned. I've talked to a lot of business owners, workers. Today there were steel layoffs that were announced. I just read a Globe and Mail article about that. So the American tariffs are a big problem. They're a problem that have been made worse by 10 years of Liberal policy that have made life unaffordable, rent unaffordable, groceries unaffordable. And so, where I saw the income tax announcement really capturing every issue, as opposed to the Liberals have this very narrow lane of communication, right? They're trying to just get everybody to forget about their record, forget about the fact that Mark Carney has, it's Justin Trudeau's team, both behind the scenes in the cabinet. He's also Justin Trudeau's senior economic advisor. So these are the people that are asking for a fourth term after creating all these terrible policies that have left Canada in this weekend perspective. They're trying to deflect the blame. Whereas the Conservative Party, you saw Pierre Poilievre out this week saying, Canadians deserve a government that is going to restore hope with a new plan. And then he says, for a change, right? And so I do think Pierre, with the income tax announcement on day one, was really touching that whole basket of issues. Affordability. We'll be talking about crime more during the campaign as well. And also just saying, look, this is a serious contrast to 10 years of Liberal policies that have increased taxes, increased the tax burden on Canadians. And so I think you're right. We heard this last night when we were on the doors. It was a popular policy. People are already hearing about it.
Yeah, and it's one that, like you said, it affects everybody, and it is so easy to understand, and the results are so tangible from it. And that, I think, is why it is resonating with people. And it's important to talk about the record of the Liberals under Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney, but it's also important for us to present that plan. And so this does both. And I think that's why it's resonating with everybody.
So I'm going to blast through. There are three very big announcements as well, but these were the other announcements that were made this week by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. So he announced earlier this week that Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes up to $1.3 million. So the estimate is that this plan will save homebuyers up to $65,000 on the purchase of an average home in big cities, and save roughly $3,000 in mortgage payments annually. It will spark the creation of 3,600 extra homes annually, generate income for construction workers and business, and it's projected to raise an extra $2.52 billion in income tax revenues from trade workers and home builders. So, when you couple that with the income tax cut, that's a big policy. Today, Pierre Poilievre came out and announced that he had a tax savings plan for seniors, specifically targeted to seniors as well. So the income tax announcement, it affects everybody, young, retired, whatever, affects everybody. The home buyer tax removal also available to a wide breadth of Canadians. And today on seniors, because we hear on the door seniors issues as well too, that he is going to allow working seniors to earn up to $34,000 tax-free. That's a $10,000 increase from the current state. He's going to allow seniors the options of keeping savings in their RSPs until age 73, up from age 71. And he also committed to protect old age security, the GIS, and CPP by keeping the retirement age at 65. So again, another big announcement, particularly for seniors. And we've heard that on the door too. I'll just close really quickly. The other big announcement this week that was notable was that he committed to axe the entire federal carbon tax. So Mark Carney so first of all, the Liberals have not committed to scrapping the carbon tax law. They could have recalled Parliament to do that. They did not. But Mark Carney went on TV a few weeks ago, we've talked about this a couple of times, to say that he would add a new tax on critical industry sectors like steel and aluminum. And this was after the threat of American tariffs was posed. So what Pierre said that he would do is axe the carbon tax on the entire, like all of the carbon tax,
right?
On
exactly, yeah.
Well, too, to make us more competitive. So you've got four major announcements that will have an immediate, significant, positive, and hopeful economic impact on the country, and immediately strengthen Canada's economy, particularly in the light or in the face of the threat of American tariffs, should the Conservatives form government. And this is a really positive, hopeful momentum campaign, and it was great to see.
Yeah, and I think it stands in stark contrast to what you're seeing come out of Mark Carney and the Liberals, which is this fear and negativity that they're trying to capitalize on, and not wanting to talk about issues around housing, not wanting to talk about income tax, not wanting to talk about seniors issues, because they don't want people to remember what the last 10 years of Liberal policies have done to families and to seniors and to Canadians across the country. And so I think this type of positive, hopeful policy is not only resonating with people just as smart policy, but is resonating because it is restoring hope in what the Canadian promise is
Yes.
for families across the country. And we're seeing that. We're just seeing that day after day, door after door, that people are just saying, you guys, you have to win, because these policies are the difference maker for our family.
Yeah, and on that note, just before we get into some of the criticisms of what the Liberals announced this week, um, we were out on the doors last night, and we had quite a few people say to us exactly that. Like at least a few dozen say, "You guys have to win. You have to win." Like almost with this like level of panic
Urgency.
we've never seen before. You have to
Yeah.
win because people know that we need a change. But um, what was interesting was you and I showed a few people last night on the door footage from Pierre Poilievre's rally last night. I think it was in Hamilton, right?
Yeah,
Or
I
in
think
the
so. Yeah.
Golden Horseshoe area. And what was so cool for me to see last night was that that's an area that has a lot of really significant working class people there. There's a lot of, union workers. There's a lot of trades workers, people that really have suffered under, frankly, the Liberals and the NDP, their coalition over the last 10 years. And there was over 4,500 people. That was some of the reports that I saw that showed up to this rally last night for Pierre in an area where, conservatives typically haven't won a lot of seats in the past. There was a very long line of people left to
Yeah.
get in that couldn't get in. And I do think that, like, and I'm going to write about this in the coming weeks, we don't get a fair shake as the conservative movement on public broadcasters like the CBC or in certain types of media that receive government subsidies and whatnot. We just don't. There's definitely a left bias. But what I have noticed is that people are getting their information in different places, and they also don't trust the Liberals. So there is this movement out there that I just don't think is being captured adequately, and you can feel it on the ground. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we have these policies that are front and center that are, such a positive contrast to the last decade of policies. And on that note, so the Liberals, they had one kind of weak announcement this week. They started talking about something they should have done something about over the last decade, which is the state of Canada's military. And Global News reporter Mercedes Stevenson, she put this tweet out, and she said, I'll just read from it. She said, looking through Liberal leader Mark Carney's defense announcement today, no plan to go beyond 2% GDP on defense spending, and no plan to get there faster than 2030 at a time when our allies are accelerating defense spending and increasing it. So, there were criticisms of the Liberals' plan right off the bat. So, but that wasn't the least of the Liberals' problems this week so far. And
No, it was not.
We're recording this on Wednesday, so it's only Wednesday. Yeah. Do you have some like just high level observations of Mark Carney? This is his first campaign. You've watched a lot. I know you've been watching the coverage of his press conferences this week. Before we get into a few of the key issues, just to set the stage.
Yeah, I mean, this is somebody that I think is, to the regular political observer, somebody that has not really thought about what the message of the campaign really is going to be, and hasn't quite found his footing, and worse than that, seems agitated and annoyed and even angry at some points that that there are people questioning and asking him questions, not only about him and who he is and his personal interests, but also about their plans and their policies. And this should not come as any surprise to Mark Carney, because it certainly doesn't come as a surprise to anybody that has been in politics for any length of time, is you get asked questions about your policies. And Canadians are tuning in now to an election. They are seeing this individual who has become prime minister and is running the Liberal Party and wants a fourth mandate. And they are rightly asking questions about who he is, because they don't quite know who Mark Carney is and what he's all about. And instead of being transparent, he's being anything but. He is dodging and poking back at any questions on this, and quite frankly seems pretty annoyed at even the mere mention or questioning of any of this. And it's beginning to, I think, get to a point where more Canadians are noticing that. I think it's a problem for them.
Like what I noticed was he has this very arrogant, dismissive attitude, right?
Yeah, that's the right word. Yeah.
Like last we talked about this a while ago, where he, a week and a half ago, he was completely dismissive even of Rosemary Barton. Like nobody's accused Rosemary Barton of being sympathetic to the Conservatives. Seriously, I mean, this is somebody who has repeatedly demonstrated a left-wing bias in her reporting, and so she asked him this, I thought, fairly straightforward question, and he was so dismissive of her, very arrogant.
Yep.
And you'll notice when he talks to reporters, he uses their first names, like this over familiarity, as and if you study certain types of behavior, that over familiarity is a way to assert dominance, and it's a show of arrogance, right? So he'll be like, well, listen, Rosie, right? Or listen, you pores. Like, it's just this dripping elitist tone that it comes through every time. And I think it's why, the Liberal campaign is keeping him away from the media. But there are some other big issues that have come out in the first 4 days of the campaign. So let's start with the issue that actually broke today. It's Wednesday, and this actually was from a CBC reporter. It's from Daniel LeBlanc, and I think, Sean, he was the reporter who actually broke the sponsorship scandal. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I think we have a screenshot of the story here. So the story headline reads, Carney's green funds at Brookfield used Bermuda tax haven to attract investors. Okay, so let's walk through what the issue here. The issue here, like on a very high level, is that over the last decade of the Liberal government, they've doubled the size of the debt. Our deficit is huge, and you have somebody who's running for prime minister who, in this article, their company, and he was the chair of the board, the most senior position, it's pointed out that they were looking for ways to essentially avoid paying Canadian taxes. So on one hand, you've got a guy who's he's trying to run for prime minister after a decade of essentially Liberal debt and deficit. And on the other hand, he spent the last however long leading a company that today in the CBC, they're saying, like, look, why is all this being run through Bermuda? And I'll just I'll read from a key part of the article here. It says, in his time at Brookfield Asset Management, Liberal leader Mark Carney personally chaired 2 investment funds dedicated to the transition to a net zero carbon economy worth a total of $25 billion. These funds were registered in Bermuda, among other locations, allowing investors to benefit from significant tax advantages. And then it goes on to say, a spokesperson from the Liberal Party refused to answer questions about Carney's activities at Brookfield, or whether he personally had assets in tax havens before they were put into a blind trust. So, I mean, why? Like, I don't understand why the Liberals aren't just forcing him to come clean on this. Some of the stuff. These issues have been dogging him for weeks. It's weird, hey?
Well, and I think that's the real question here, is why won't he answer questions about this? And when you see the few reporters that actually do try to bring this up, he like I said, gets agitated and deflects and dodges on this. And I think this is at the heart of it. The problem is Canadians don't know who Mark Carney is. And the more that some of these questions come up, they really realize that we don't know who Mark Carney is or what he's about or what he has been about. And so it raises just a lot of questions, and quite frankly, concerning questions for somebody that is asking to be given the role of prime minister and a fourth mandate. And
Yeah.
so I do not think that the media or the Conservatives and the opposition should be letting up on this questioning. Canadians should be demanding answers and transparency to this, because these are big questions and they deserve a fully transparent answer.
So on this issue, he was actually asked about it this morning, and I think we have the clip. I think it's the CPAC clip of his response to questions. Let's have a listen.
The structure of these funds is designed to benefit the pension funds, the Canadian pension funds that invest in them. The Caisse de dépôt, Ontario Teachers is two examples. The beneficiaries of those pension funds, teachers, retirees, municipal employees, they pay the taxes on their pension. That's the design. The follow-up is how do I know? I understand how the world works and the structure works. And
so again, you hear the arrogant tone, but I want to break down for people who don't understand what he's saying. I want to poke a hole in his argument there. So he's trying to argue that taxes are, that somehow the taxes are paid in Canada. He talks about public pension funds, and sure, like pensioners who get pension payments, they do have to file their taxes in Canada. But the problem is that him, so as board chair, and Brookfield's executives, whatever, they're the bigwigs, they can potentially avoid paying taxes on what they make managing on these Bermuda located funds. So it's kind of like, well, again, it's the big guys that are using these allegedly using these tax havens that get the break, whereas he's admitting to the fact that the little guy has to pay, right? But it's that arrogant tone that we were just talking about, right? He's like, well, I understand how the world works. And I'm like, no, the people in Canada who have to pay ridiculous liberal taxes because of the decade of debt and increasing our deficit, they're the ones who have to pay. So no, you don't understand how the world works, Mark, because he doesn't understand how the people in our community can't afford to buy food right now because of exact situations like this. It was just really, wow. Hey,
it's bizarre explanation, a bit of a rambling, kind of winding, technical, try to confuse you answer to something that should be pretty straightforward for them to answer. And again, I come back to that question of if you're not providing transparency and not answering the question, why is that? What is there to hide here? And that's really the concerning part about all of this is Canadians are smart. They know full well how much they pay taxes and where their income comes from and all of that. They don't need Mark Carney to explain that. They know better than anybody because they're the ones that are having to pay the bills.
Works.
Yeah. So I really don't think they need banker Mark Carney explaining to them how their own tax and financial situation works. What they want to know is about his. And that's the question that they want answers to.
I saw this and I was like, he's like, elbows up Canada. I'm like, Bermuda strong. That's what you're saying, Mark Carney. That's been your slogan. Elbows up Bermuda. Here's my pina colada. I love Bermuda. It is great. Just whatever. Anyway, we could go on forever on that. And I shouldn't laugh because it's just so preposterous, and outrageous that anyway. There are two other Brookfield issues that came up for him this week. One was so these big companies, they have to issue statements and reports to their shareholders. And the note to their stakeholders that came out, I think it was in our shareholders in, I want to say it's quarter two of 2023. It was in 2023. There's a note in there about how they approach real estate. Now, before I read this, I'm just going to say, like, again, one of the top concerns across the country is the cost of rent and how fast rent costs have increased. I mean, they've doubled over a very short period of time. A lot of scarce housing. People can't find homes to buy, never mind afford them. Now, this is what was in the note to shareholders from Mark Carney's company that he chaired. It said this. So it was under the note about real estate. We've recently launched fundraising for the 5th vintage of our opportunistic real estate fund and expect a first close later this year. Historically, many of the substantial gains in real estate were made during periods of capital scarcity. So we are confident that investors will look to deploy meaningful amounts of capital to opportunistic real estate strategies in order to take advantage of the stress in the market, which is our sweet spot. As the funding markets turn, we expect to be a beneficiary. So here you have a guy who's running for prime minister in the middle of a generational housing crisis where housing unaffordability is number one issue. And he chaired the company that was like, yep, we're taking advantage of this situation. In fact, we're structuring a fund, like a whole funding strategy around it, a whole corporate strategy. It's our sweet spot. And like, so when he comes out and says in that clip before, well, I understand how the world works. Yeah, for somebody who's as wealthy as he is, how can he have any credibility to go to somebody who is struggling to pay rent in a Brookfield property or something like that and say, oh yeah, I've got you. I understand your plight.
How can they believe it? Because this is the entire Liberal platform is believe what we say, not what we've done. And so this is another piece of evidence to demonstrate that the Liberals really stand for nothing and will say anything to try and retain power. And so, as you've rightly pointed out, we are in the midst of a massive housing crisis where Canadians have really struggled to be able to afford housing. I don't know how many doors we have hit where parents are talking about middle-aged children that are living in their homes that cannot get out because either rent is too high or they can't afford housing. And here we have a prime minister who is, again, asking for a 4th Liberal mandate that has perpetuated the problem in this country and saying, well, don't believe what we've done, just believe what we say. And I think Canadians are smarter than that. And they're continuing to see time after time after time, the Liberals trying to pull one over on Canadians.
So, but wait, there's more.
Yeah, of course, right?
There's more. So Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre earlier this week, actually, I think it was yesterday, every day feels so long in a campaign. During a press conference, he raised another issue about Mark Carney's conduct when he was chair of Brookfield. And we'll just play the clip of Mr. Poilievre's press conference, and then we'll talk about the issue.
After Justin Trudeau named Mark Carney his economic advisor, giving him massive power over public policy in Canada, Mr. Carney went over for meetings in Beijing where he just had secret talks with the deputy governor of the Chinese central bank. 2 weeks later, Brookfield got a $250 million loan. What did they talk about? What did Mr. Carney in his role as Trudeau's economic advisor offer of China? Why would he be having secret meetings with top government-controlled bankers about getting a $250 million loan while he was supposed to be acting in Canada's interest as the Prime Minister's economic advisor? Why would he be collaborating with a hostile foreign regime that we have since learned executed 4 Canadians and took numerous Canadians hostage for a lengthy period of time? And given that Mr. Carney knows that he still owns massive financial interests in Brookfield, which owes $250 million to a Chinese state-controlled bank, how do we know he's not going to act against our interests in favor of his financial interests? Why didn't he stand in front of this microphone and confess to Canadians that he owes the Chinese government that kind of money? Is this why he's covering up his financial interests? And given that China has murdered our people, taken our people hostage, how is he ever going to stand up to foreign interference when he is so financially compromised? We have never in our history had a weak, out-of-touch leader so terribly compromised and conflicted, whose interests go against our national interests. And I call on Mr. Carney right now to come before a microphone today and explain if this loan is still in place and if he still has those Brookfield assets that he had up until a few weeks ago.
I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing is, that this issue has not been covered adequately in the Canadian press, like the mainstream media at all, right? Like it's that's a pretty significant issue. So, three big issues with his just this week alone with his time in Brookfield, and he's got a lot of answers to give, which have not happened yet. So,
yeah, I mean, this is a direct result of the fact that Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament, shut it down. The Liberals went through a coronation process as opposed to a real campaign to elect a leader where there was not much scrutiny or questions given. And here we are left in the midst of what is likely the most consequential federal election in our history. And we are not getting answers to serious questions like these. And so people really need to continue to push for answers on this. I would say if the Liberal candidate in your community is showing up at the door, ask them questions about this. Ask why we're not getting answers on this, and get out and support your Conservative candidate as well. And I think that only really Canadians sharing this information and pushing for answers will there ever be a hope of getting some sort of transparency. But it's serious, and it really is concerning that these questions are just left hanging out there without any real answer.
So there was one more issue that dogged Mr. Carney all week, and that's why he decided to dodge the TVA debate in Quebec. Now,
yes.
For those who are listening from English Canada, this is a big deal. So TVA has a huge footprint in Quebec. It's I would say it's almost like a core part of day-to-day life in Quebec. Like if you want to talk about anything politically in Quebec, you are dealing with this network. You are trying to be on it, and so the French language debate on that network is pretty critical. So he said he wouldn't do it. Well, at first, actually, I think he said he would do it, and then the campaign said he wouldn't do it later.
Yeah.
Just very embarrassing. He's had major problems with French language all week, which is, if you're running for prime minister, right? Like, and you're asking Quebecois for their vote, that's a pretty big thing to not be able to communicate in the French language at the level you would be required to as prime minister. But further to that, then Pierre Poilievre had a counter, right? He said, "Oh wait, if money's the issue, you can I'll pay for you," right? I think he offered to pay the $75,000 entrance fee or something. So you've seen a lot of coverage about his alleged. Well, he has. It's an inability to speak French. He also misnamed one of the Liberal candidates that had been involved in the École Polytechnique massacre. He also misnamed the institution that incredible tragedy, which shaped a lot of Canadian history, occurred. Like, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think this is, again, evidence that this individual is not really ready for prime time, and that's why they are keeping the lid on him as much as possible. It's impossible to run for prime minister and not be out there, but they are really not putting him in many compromising or potentially compromising positions. They're certainly keeping him as low profile as possible, and this is not the way that Canadians should expect or tolerate their campaigns to be run. And they should be pushing for not less access, more transparency. And so, yeah, when it comes to the TVA debate, I mean, this is just a totally missed opportunity for a large part of the country to see their candidates for prime minister answer questions. And so Canadians are the ones that lose out here. And so, yeah, maybe it benefits Mark Carney and the Liberals for him not to be in there, but the country doesn't benefit at all. The province of Quebec doesn't benefit at all. This just puts voters in the country at a disadvantage when question or answers to questions are in short enough supply as it is from Mark Carney and the Liberals. This just further perpetuates that lack of information.
I just thought it was shocking, like,
Yeah.
actually kind of arrogant. Also, you've had ministers like Melanie Joly during the Liberal leadership race, who she did endorse Mark Carney at the time, but she was kind of ragging on other Liberal leadership candidates about their inability to speak French. Well, why isn't she saying something now? Like, clearly the leader is not proficient in the language. And the Liberals, I do think they take the votes of Quebecers for granted. I'm a Western Canadian MP, and I've had the opportunity. I wouldn't, I wouldn't purport to be a Quebecois, but certainly my dad's side of the family has a francophone background. I've spent a lot of time during my time in Parliament in Quebec. And even as a Western Canadian, I understand how important the French language is to that part of Canada and to the people who live there, right?
Mhm.
And he should know this. He should be able to communicate in that, and especially at a time when he's trying to make the argument about a strengthened, unified Canada. Well, how can you do that if you can't speak French appropriately, or if you're unwilling to debate in the language? And then the gaffe about not knowing about the Montreal massacre, that he made. It was just, this is a guy. I just don't think he's ready for prime time, Sean.
No, I think that that's pretty evident at this point. And I think that raises questions about his ability to take on some of the challenges that prime ministers inevitably have to do. That is what campaigns demonstrate in part to Canadians is, are you ready for the job? Can you take on the important challenges of prime minister? Because Canadians' lives are at stake here, their livelihoods and what happens with their families and all these issues that we're talking about as it relates to housing and jobs and affordability and all of these things. And at a time of great challenge and instability in the world, I think Canadians are looking for who can take this on. And somebody that is dodging or is angry and arrogant about the types of answers is not providing the level of comfort for people that I think they are looking for as they're making up their mind. And so I think that is why we are seeing people look at Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives when he is putting out positive, hopeful policy that speaks to those issues and rises above the campaign. I think that's why it's resonating with people.
And on that note, we've got some campaigning to do.
That's right.
I can feel you telling me to get on the the morning is over. It's time. It's time to go door knocking. I can feel it. So for those of you who are listening, it is really important that you are subscribing to sources of news that discuss some of these issues that might not be covered in the mainstream media. So thanks for tuning in, and please click auto download if you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed here as well too, and share this video, share this podcast with a friend, and help us get the word out. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.